Hello, World Economic News for Thursday. And just to say to start with that I normally put these articles in some sort of order, so there's some sort of a theme that makes some sort of sense, if I can make sense of it. But in this one, I'm trying to do the opposite and to show that effectively this is an uncontrollable thing, this economy thing, because it is so diverse and confused and confusing, and there's nobody that can possibly understand it. So I'm sorry about putting together a video like this, but I think it's important to understand how incomprehensible this is than even to understand it sometimes. Okay, let's kick in. Financial Times. Tracy Alloway. Two views on QE'd commodity prices. First up, the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, who write, however, daily data indicate that Federal Reserve announcements of large-scale asset purchases tended to lower commodity prices even as long-term interest rates and the value of the dollar declined. A lot of information in there, but you can see that they think the Fed's QE2 has not raised commodity prices. Secondly, the Bank of Japan. Bit confusing the way this is written, but from the bold we get, consequently, global commodity markets have become more sensitive to portfolio rebalancing by financial investors. Portfolio rebalancing would be if the Fed, for example, takes huge quantities of mortgage-backed securities out of your portfolio because they've bought them in their quantitative easing, or treasuries, the Fed's bought them. What are you going to replace them with? That's the portfolio rebalancing by financial investors, which has made commodity markets more correlated with other asset markets, including major equity markets. Furthermore, globally, accommodative monetary conditions have played an important role in the surge in commodity prices, both by stimulating physical demand for commodities and driving more investment flows into financialized commodity markets. In other words, just betting on them. The Bank of Japan says that QE2 and things like it have driven up commodity prices. The Fed says it hasn't. Who is right? Or either of them right? In the article, in the comments for that article, Casey Ryback says, seems to me the Bank of Japan are spot on with this. Still, I suspect we will find out when QE comes to an end, if it ever does. Calculated risk. Bernanke in a question and answer. Inflation will be transitory. From the Dow Jones, Fed Bernanke downplays inflation fears. Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke Monday downplayed inflation fears. Bernanke said the rise in global commodity prices is likely to be temporary and shouldn't translate into a broad inflation problem. So there we are. Inflation, according to the Fed, is going to be transitory and certainly won't deepen. Now, I tend to agree. Are we both right, me and the Fed? Is there anything such a thing as right? It's on that one you can say, well, either inflation will take off or it won't. I don't think it will. Bloomberg, Russia's stocks drop first day in 3 as China raises interest rates. Russian stocks dropped for the first day in 3 after China raised interest rates for the 4th time since the financial crisis. Why people like Bloomberg like to link things like that, I don't know. But the important part there is that China has put up interest rates for the 4th time since the crisis began. They are trying to calm their inflation. Financial Times, Vietnam, swift but slower tightening. The State Bank of Vietnam has raised 2 key interest rates by a full percentage point. The most recent move affects the refinancing and repurchase rates, taking both to 13%. Annual inflation is expected to reach 13.9% year-on-year in Vietnam. Financial Times, Alphaville, Tracy Alloway, Michael Pettis on China's useless banks. A very interesting article. I'll bring out the bold in this as well. As I see it, there are, broadly speaking, two very different conceptions of the role of a country's financial systems. In one, banks act largely as fiscal agents for the government or the economic elite, accumulating savings and deploying the capital into projects usually selected for promotion by those elites. Got it? So in China, the government tells the banks where to invest. Next link. Since banks are in the business of taking risk, and since rapid credit expansion is inherently risky, the only way to guarantee financial stability is to extract much or all of the risk from the banks and embed them elsewhere. In practice, the only elsewhere big enough is the state. In other words, with state-run banks, the risk lies with the people. These kinds of financial systems inevitably run into the problem of capital misallocation. It doesn't matter if at one point they do a great job of allocating capital and generating real growth. As long as the same allocation process is maintained, it seems at some point they begin to overinvest. And the implication is that that is the point that China is at, man. The other system is to let the banks have what is called their own capital to invest their way, with using their brains, allocating capital the way they think best. But that's got to be a capitalistic system that if they get it wrong, they get it in the neck, which keeps their head connected to the world. And that is what is not happening in the world now. The bankers do not get it in the neck, so their brains are not engaged into correct allocation of capital. Financial Times, Alphaville, Gwen Robinson, 5 reasons the yen will strengthen. You can read the article yourself, but I mean, isn't that confusing? Initially, the yen, the country in the world with most indebted, and it's just been hit by a disaster, and all round is not having a good time of it, but there are the 5 reasons there that their currency will strengthen. Tricky. Greece and its most grim sovereign bank loop by Tracy Alloway. Busy girl, busy girl. I won't read it all. We know what Ireland's up to with its own little central bank shenanigans, and apparently Greece are doing the same sort of things. There is still great amounts of trouble going on in the European Union. Hugh Hendry, the Electra Fund. I think we all probably know Hugh Hendry and like him for his eccentricities. I pulled out this paragraph from his fund paper. Now the question to ask has to be whether or not China would be prepared to assume the role of hero all over again if global GDP runs out of steam. What he's saying is that in the last financial hiccup, China did not have to inject the huge quantities of money that it did, but it did. And he asks, will it do it again if there is another hiccup? The Fed's antagonistic quantitative easing program may have sapped its willingness, that's China's willingness, to help out Team World, in which case the only remedy for a prospective slowdown will be further quantitative easing and Western commitment for rates to remain lower for longer. This is just adding to the great question, will they continue with quantitative easing? And I'll just point out here that The people that I respect most reading them seem to think they will try stopping quantitative easing in the United States, but will definitely stay with ZIRP, zero interest rate policy, for as far as the eye can see, and the eye can see a long way. Tilt, which is Financial Times, India's input costs rise to the highest level, pushing up prices, and we get this chart, which I thought I'd put because it's quite clear, this chart. Input prices, that darker red, and you can see where it's come from the bottom of the hiccup up to now. Input prices are severely going north, and India still struggling with inflation problems. Finish with weekly US retail gasoline prices since 2000, a Doug Short chart, and we can clearly see that in the United States, when barrel prices of oil go up, the gasoline at the pump goes up very pro rata, and it's looking pretty wicked there. Premium 3.9 average across the United States. Is that right? Regular at 3.6. Oh yeah, premium is considered to be the good fuel. Yeah, hacking up towards 4. And quite a few people are saying it could well be 5 by summer. But then what do quite a few people know? It is tricky, isn't it? So I'll leave you with all that information to sort out. Hopefully it's just spinning round in your mind and trying to find a home. But it's very difficult. You can't find a home for information. It just goes in and goes round and falls somewhere or just gets forgotten. And it's the same in everyone's brain, even these geniuses. Nobody can put all this information in the right places in their brains. It just doesn't happen that way. We can help each other. That's the best we can do. And that's what these videos are for. Information. That's it. See you tomorrow. Bye.